you've written a book on gold, which is at the moment going through the sort of proofreading, whatever. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I look at gold from the beginning of time, Alasdair, and through to the present day. The sort of working title is The Past, the Present and the Future of Gold. And I suppose as good a place as any to get started is with this fact that when you look at how was gold created in the first place, and there are two theories. One is divine creation of God, and the other theory is that it came about when stars collided, interstellar collisions, and in the resulting explosions, all sorts of heavy metals get created, and along with dust and all sorts of other things. And then the explosions disperse them into space. And then over time, all that dust gradually accretes, gravitational pressure pushes it together, collisions, and that's how gold got into the Earth's crust in the first place. So that means, if you consider the fact that gold you cannot destroy gold, it means that all the gold that's in the Earth's crust, and indeed that little bit of gold that you've got on your ring around your neck, is not only older than the Earth itself, it's older than the solar system itself.
Wow. And
I always think that's a very profound thought, and therefore to touch gold, this inner nothing, is actually the closest you will ever come to touching eternity. And I've always thought that's a very profound thought, and it's the first metal that human beings ever used. We were using it in the Stone Age long before we were using copper or tin or smelting or anything like that, and we used it as decoration to show off our wealth, to show off our allure. We used it as a prize, as a reward, as an expression of gratitude. In other words, we used it to store and display wealth, which is exactly, and exchange a little bit as well. And that's exactly what we use it for now. And mostly as a store, but it's still used as an exchange. Russia paid Iran, flew 3 tons of gold to Iran a couple of years ago to pay for drones. So even today, in extremis, we're still using it as an exchange. And people say, oh, it's an out-of-date analog asset. It's the most, in this digital age, it's the most analog asset there is. But it is also the oldest asset there is, and we have an instinct for it. And that's why I don't think it'll ever be redundant.
No. I must say, when you're telling me about how it evolved out of space, as it were, I don't know if you've been to Cairo and gone to the museum there and seen Tutankhamun's mask. I mean, when that's, 3,000 years old, and it's absolutely bright, shining, as if it was new. It's quite extraordinary. So as to your point that it never changes, I mean, that I think is living proof of it. And not only that, but in this country, we've uncovered artifacts from Celtic eras, from Roman eras, and all the rest of it, gold bits and pieces. Absolutely perfect. And you go and see them in museums, and you just marvel that these things have lasted so long.
In that same museum in Cairo, there's a tooth bridge, which would be like wire to bind together your teeth with your dentures, that's 5,000 years old, even older than Tutankhamun's mask, and it's good enough to go in your mouth today.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And you talked about Tutankhamun's mask. The ancients all associated gold with the gods. The South Americans said it was the tears of the sun or the sweat of the sun. And the Egyptians, in the really ancient Egyptians, only the royal family were allowed to handle gold. Other people weren't allowed to. It was a royal prerogative. A bit like Roosevelt in the 1930s, only the state
right, and today, states still do that.
But not individuals. But in any case, it was the link. The kings was always associated with the divine, and it was the link, to pass on, so that the king could have safe passage into the afterlife. Gold would give him that passage, and the South Americans thought it was the link between humanity and the cosmos.
That's fascinating. I mean, we're going back to the times when it sort of evolved, I suppose, from just being ornamental for the gods or for the to-be gods to being a medium of commerce and money. When they keep on telling us nowadays, it's the sort of double coincidence of wants. If you don't have that, you've got to have something in between. But actually, credit is a lot older. I mean, the reason I say this is that the first the first Roman coin was the ice, AES, which actually wasn't gold. Gold
Bronze.
came in later.
Yeah.
It was bronze, and it weighed, I think, about 2/3 of a pound or something. I mean, pretty bulky stuff. But if you think about it, the Phoenicians were trading 1,000 years before that. Now, so they must have settled that without coinage, whatever. It must have been credit, because how do you get a ship, let's say, to go to Cornwall to pick up tin, which the Phoenicians allegedly did? How do you do that without having the resources to feed the slaves who row the ship, to everything else that's required? Is credit. So credit actually preceded money. But the interesting thing is that money was regularized by the Romans, even though coins had existed before then, gold coins had existed before, it was regularized by the Romans in their 12 tables in 448 BC. And they also set down the relationship between money and credit. And so few people today actually understand that very, very simple distinction.
It's such an important distinction. And there's so many things I wanted to pick up on there and what you say. The first thing is what you say about credit. Human beings have been using gold since before the beginning of civilization. But they started using credit at the beginning of civilization.
Yeah.
And what they would do is you would have a little bit of clay, and it was coming down off the Zagros Mountains into the fertile plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and it was the mud that built, the mud made the first houses, the mud gave crop yields they'd never discovered before. But what they would do is they would bake, you would have a little token, I forget which, like a disc would be a sheep, and a cone would be a bit of barley, and you would bake these tokens inside clay balls, and when the debt was settled, you'd smash open the clay ball. And then they discovered that it was quicker, rather than doing that, to just inscribe the clay with pictures of those tokens instead. And thus did the first systems of writing emerge. And it was based around money and credit. And what were the first debts owed? Taxes.
Absolutely, yes.
Taxes.
Exactly, always.
And so, but then, if we fast forward in time, we think of the first telegraph. The cable laid under the Atlantic Ocean between Britain and the United States. And within a week of them getting that first telegraph cable operational, two parties that trusted each other, two banks, were agreeing an exchange rate between the US dollar and the pound. That's why it's known as cable. Now, both countries were on the gold standard. They weren't sending gold along that cable. You can't send gold along that table. They were sending a promise.
It's credit.
Absolutely.
Exactly, yeah.
And if we look at money today, all it is promises. Credit, I believe, it's the same thing. Even fiat money, I promise to pay the bearer.
It's credit.
It's all promises. And more, so that's why promissory money, credit, has evolved as communication technology has evolved. And now I think there are more, SWIFT is essentially a messaging network between parties that trust each other. And so what we use as promissory money, we no longer need metals. It will change as communication technology evolves, and at the moment it's all digital. But at the root of it all is the one money that is nobody else's. It doesn't require credit. It doesn't require any liability on the other side. It is a bearer asset. It is money in itself, and that, of course, is gold, and that's fundamental to everything.
But by the time, you invent gold as money, and you standardize, let's say, through coins or something like that. It's it's the sheet anchor for the value of credit, because all credit refers back to the coinage, in effect. And it's either gold or silver or even copper, but basically we're talking about gold. So, your credit has got to be tied to gold. So, since 1971, when we came off the last of the rather weak gold standards, the Bretton Woods Agreement, that's been completely unattached. Credit is no longer attached to gold. Yet we see that the value of the dollar in terms of gold has actually fallen from $35 to the ounce to, and of course you've got to look at it upside down, to, as we speak, something like $2,750. I mean, that implies there's only literally 1% or 1% of value left in the dollar from that day. And that's what, over 50 years. So it seems to me that the most important thing, and I don't know if you've addressed this much in your book, is the relationship between gold and how it should secure the value of credit.
It's a very, very profound and important subject, and it might, as this decade evolves, come to be the issue of our times, because thanks, bizarrely, almost more to Bitcoin than gold, the fiat, like I remember when I was first writing about this stuff 15, 20 years ago, every time you wrote the word fiat, you had to put in brackets what fiat means.
Yes.
And now everyone understands it.
Yeah.
And it's really Bitcoin that's taken that message to the younger generation.
Yeah.
And, you know, I use the Revolut app and it calls it fiat or crypto.
Really?
It actually refers to it on Revolut as fiat. So it's in the lexicon now. And people know that fiat has no intrinsic value. It is just the law that is backing it. And they see, you know, particularly since COVID, when inflation was very, very real because it was consumer price inflation rather than house price or asset price inflation. It was, you know, you saw prices in supermarkets going up. So it was very real and very felt. And so I just think the narrative of the declining purchasing power of the dollar or the pound or the euro is well and truly out of the bag. And people realise it's a useless store of wealth. It's a good medium of exchange, but it's a useless store of wealth. And it's been going on for 50 years, 2 generations. It must be in its end game. But I've been saying it's going to end 20 years, and it hasn't. And so how long can it go on? We don't know. But for sure, whatever replaces it has to win back people's trust again.
Yeah.
And the proven test of history is that there has never been a global reserve currency that did not start out backed by gold. Whether it's some Chinese or a BRICS thing or it's China's yuan or an international super country, whatever it is, everyone has to know that at any point they can go in and they can exchange it for gold. And it is that knowledge that they can exchange it for gold that will give it its value.
Yeah.
That's not so, and it's, funnily enough, it's the knowledge that they can exchange it for gold is what will actually stop them feeling the need to exchange it for gold. It's when they can't that then they want value for it. So I think gold has a huge role to play in the future. And with that in mind, Alasdair, because I mean I'm following the subject closely, but I think you're following it more closely than I am, is this issue of a BRICS currency, Bridge, Chinese yuan, how much gold there is in China. That's a subject I've written about at great length, and as I know have you. We've got the BRICS summit going on this week. Why don't you start by telling us what Putin said, because the main agenda was de-dollarization, but Putin kind of booted that agenda out before the summit even started.
Yeah, it was going that way, so we knew that was, it was unlikely we'd actually get the announcement of a new gold-backed BRICS currency. And not only that, but people who were sort of supposed to be experts in the whole thing were making comments which was just such rubbish, like 40% gold and 60% currencies. I mean, come on, that just doesn't work. They don't understand credit. They don't understand that credit is created out of thin air. And that's the way actually the world works. So, the commentary on this was so obviously wrong. And it is clear that the whole decision about a BRICS currency is essentially political. I think that's the key thing. Now, the reason I say that is that as far as Russia is concerned, she has not only the gold resources. I mean, I'm told that apart from what the Central Bank of Russia has, there are additional gold resources in the order of about 10,000 tons held in, if you like, sovereign wealth funds.
Russia?
Yeah, Russia.
10,000 tons?
Yeah. So they've got about 12,000 in total.
Huge reserves in the ground.
Yeah, I think that that total perhaps gives some comfort that they can do this, but it's actually not that necessary, and I'll tell you why in a moment.
To put that number in context, the UK has 300 tons.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Brown. We sold it at what? Remind me, what was that?
250.
Oh, really? Oh, really? Yes. Well, that's a Keynesian approach. I mean, I'm digressing slightly, but I've always looked at Gordon Brown. I mean, he was a history teacher. He didn't know anything about economics, so he had a quick course when it was clear that Labour were going to get into power and he's going to be Chancellor. And if you like, his instructor was Ed Balls, who was rabid Keynesian, highly qualified, with degrees from Oxford and Harvard, and he was a leader writer for the Financial Times at the time. I mean, a real Keynesian. So you can see where he got the Keynesian thing. This is an asset which is no longer part of the monetary system. Why is the Bank of England, or why is the Treasury holding on to it? We're going to get rid of it, and we're going to give the proceeds to the deserving poor around the world, or something like that. A load of hogwash. Anyway, that's what led to it. But I was thinking actually while you were talking about prices. You mentioned prices, and how people begin to realise that currency is fiat rather than something which retains its value. But we still have this situation where, when you get the general level of prices rising, people don't understand that what's happening is the purchasing power of their currency is falling. And I mean, this is something that politicians have tried to stamp on going way back. I mean, I think the first recorded one in history was Diocletian in about 303 AD, when he came out with an edict of maximum prices. That told us two things. Firstly, that he was trying to counteract the effects of the debasement of his coinage and the loss of confidence in it, which is also an important factor. And the result was that the edict of maximum prices, under penalty of death, meant that any butcher, baker, candlestick maker in Rome just shut up shop and left, and that the city emptied. He didn't realise that actually it was the result of the debasement of the currency at the time, the denarius. The other thing that told us, which is actually something fascinating, is that if you look at the table of maximum prices, you can see that the prices for things that we would use today are actually quite similar to what they were 1,500 years ago, in gold.
Yeah.
In other words, the price of gold is, pretty, it fluctuates, of course it does, but it's the value of gold rather than its price fluctuates, but it's pretty constant through the centuries. And that's why you've got to tie your fiat currency to the value of gold with a proper, as you put it, exchangeable gold standard, so that anyone, not just some elite, can walk into a bank and say, I've got your notes here, I want to be paid in gold coin, exchange them for gold coin. That's so important. Yeah. And we're not going to get there, because I think, and I'd be interested in your view on this, I think that central banks are getting very possessive about gold. They don't want to lose, they don't want to give it to the public. I mean, the great unwashed, my God, no, we central banks, we hold the gold. Do you ever see them, getting back to the days of the sovereign, when we went on a gold standard in 1820, 21, 22?
Well, this was the problem of the gold standards after World War One, is that there were gold standards for central banks and governments.
Well, we were a bullion standard, I think, from 25 to 32.
Yeah, but we didn't mint a single coin, or barely any coins, any gold coins. And gold, there was no gold in circulation. Prior to World War One, sovereigns were in regular circulation. They all went to the central bank during World War One. People handed them in, took paper instead, even though... Anyway, and similarly in the States, America was on a gold standard, but ordinary American citizens couldn't own gold. So it's not a proper gold standard if citizens can't have it. And so I would have thought it's very unlikely that central banks will mint coins out of their gold and distribute them. Yeah. But there might be some kind of digital backing going on. But for this to happen, it's going to come out of Asia. Or if it was to happen in Europe or America, it would only happen because of some kind of crisis. Sure. At which point they would have to revalue gold upwards to make it work. At which point, then, last thing they want is, these pesky citizens who've been hoarding gold to get the benefits of those revaluations, so confiscation or whatever comes into it again. But it's the ally of gold is de-dollarization, and Russia is ready to de-dollarize, absolutely. And if you look at the accumulation of gold by central banks, it's from the point at which Russian assets were confiscated that this quiet and aggressive accumulation has gone on. And that's that's the easiest explanation for the high gold prices that we have today, central bank buying, because it's not happening in the retail markets.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, China's got 3 trillion of US dollars. It's not quite ready to go, we don't want to use US dollars yet. And to go onto a gold standard would be a declaration of war against the America and its money. Absolutely. So I don't think China's ready for that. I doubt India is. Russia might be. I doubt Saudi Arabia is ready. South Africa, who knows? Brazil probably isn't ready. So many of those Arab nations probably, the Stan's probably fine, but the Arab nations in the Middle East, the oil nations, America has a big military presence there. They're probably not ready either. So I just think this thing, part of me wanted it to happen this week. I want gold to go to $20,000 this week, and I can go and buy a palace in Belgravia. But I think it's just a much more gradual process that accelerates with crises.
I'm sure that's right. I sort of rather got away off topic, actually. So you brought us back to topic, which is extremely useful. BRICS. And I started by saying that Russia could go on a gold standard tomorrow. I would also point out that it's not just a question of going onto a gold standard. You've got to have the economy in the right shape in order to do it. Otherwise, you're just going to get driven off it, particularly if you don't understand what the hell you're doing, which most modern macroeconomists advising governments haven't got a clue. Let's not mince words about it. Russia, her debt to GDP is 20% and that's in spite of fighting a war on its western boundaries. The tax rate for an individual is 13%. That's income tax. If you're earning huge amounts, then
flat rate
goes up to 15%. Corporation tax is sort of quite normal in our terms. I think it's about 25%. Now, those are the conditions that Austrian economists will tell us are ripe for really good economic progress. Now, I use the word progress because growth is more associated with an increase in the amount of credit in the economy. It doesn't tell you how that credit is being used. But if you think in terms of progress, that was the whole point behind our gold standard in this country in the 19th century. I mean, prices basically over the century, I mean, they fluctuated from time to time, but the general level of prices, so far as we can see, was actually not much changed over the whole century, maybe down a bit.
They halved. Between 1816, we had the recoinage in 1816, we went on the gold standard 1821. Yep. Between then and 1914, they halved between 1820 and 1860. Then they doubled, American Civil War.
Yeah.
And then they came down again, and they halved. And there was a huge increase in the gold supply in the second half of the 20th century with all the gold rushes. And all the Economist was wrong even then. It said, gold price sure to crash as a result of the gold rushes. In fact, it was the silver. Silver was the casualty of the gold rush. And they halved. And that's because of increased productivity.
Yeah. But don't you... well, absolutely. In other words, I mean, and of course, the other aspect of this is that consumer spending wasn't financed by extra credit.
No.
The credit was targeted at production and trade. And as far as the ordinary individual was concerned, he was a saver. I mean, I think Dickens wrote, was it the Micawberism? I think that was about 1857, 58, something like that. Income 20 shillings, expenditure 19 and 6. Oh, happiness.
Yes.
Or something like that.
Result happiness. Yeah.
But if you overspent by 6p, sixpence, 2.5p in our money, oh misery. So
I'll tell you something very interesting. I took a table of various items from 1971, and I looked at their price in 1971 and today. And by the way, an interesting thing about 1971, people talk about it being such a terrible year because we abandoned the gold standard. It's also a terrible year because that's when we went metric. Yeah. But if you look at, say, various items: house price, gallon of petrol, a dozen eggs, a car, a fridge, a washing machine, something like that.
Yeah.
And a telephone call. Mm-hmm. So a telephone call has gone from costing 10p for 3 minutes for a local call to being free video call anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Digital mass deflation because of digital technology. House prices attract a lot of debt, and it's a captive market because of silly planning regulations. It can't expand. Yeah. Even car prices have bizarrely gone up. We should have got better at making cars, and there's an infinite supply of cars. But even car prices have gone up quite dramatically, but not as much as house prices. And it's because we use credit to buy cars at the original point of sale. Yeah. So, whereas washing machines are pretty much flat over the period because we don't use credit to buy washing machines, and increased productivity has improved washing machines. And similarly, if you look at beer and petrol, they've all gone up, but we don't use credit to buy them, but they are heavily taxed. So the increased taxation has pushed their prices up. But it's the items that have gone up most are the items that are a captive market that attract the highest volumes of credit. Yeah. And the items that have barely gone up are items that we buy without leverage of any kind.
The thing that's fascinating, you mentioned cars. I think I'm right in saying that in the United States, because of hedonic adjustments, which takes account of all the improvements and all the rest of it, the value of cars hasn't risen at all, according to the constructors of the Consumer Price Index.
Well, from a style perspective, cars have got worse, but from a air conditioning and all the rest of it, they've got better.
Yeah, indeed.
Stereo sound and brakes that work.
Yeah, brakes that work, exactly. You drive an old car without power steering and all the rest of it.
You certainly knew the difference. Change down to slow the car down, didn't you?
Double declutching and all that stuff, Gosh, those were the days. But, so we're in a situation now where the decline in the value of currency is becoming increasingly noticeable. I mean, it started really with the sanctions against Russia, which basically pushed up raw material prices hugely, including energy, and particularly energy. And the effect in terms of the Consumer Price Index was really quite dramatic. I mean, but that was even after being soft-soaped by government statisticians. I would argue that the inflation story, which is actually not inflation so much as but loss of purchasing power of the currency, I don't think that story is over. What's your view on that?
Well, I think the big difference between the injection of capital that happened in COVID and the injection of capital that happened after the financial crisis. So after the financial crisis, those injections of capital basically went into the financial markets. Yeah. And from there into the real estate in which people who work in financial markets live, if you see what I mean. Yeah. Whereas in COVID, because of the money went directly to individuals. And so the inflation went into the real world rather than the financial world. And that's why it was much more apparent and visible. Now, there aren't those same injections of capital. And so there isn't that increase in money supply in, when you go shopping or something. Yeah, sure. So for that reason, I don't necessarily think that the cost of, a basket of goods and services will see the same inflation that it saw back then. Also because, again, we don't use credit to buy those things, and they're all prone to the deflationary forces of improved productivity. So what I think you have to do, in a funny kind of way, is work out where the newly created money is going and then bet on those markets, if you see what I mean. And so while I don't see consumer goods getting dramatically cheaper, I don't see them, they're kind of almost, consumer prices, I don't know the exact number, but they were up a good 50% in a couple of years. Yeah. The cost of a steak or something. And I don't necessarily see them doubling or going up 150% or 50% in the next couple of years. But a couple of things that I did notice is how much cheaper food is in the UK than it is in the States.
That's a turnaround, isn't it? Because it used to be cheaper in the States.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But I was in the States earlier this year, and it just felt expensive compared to England. But that's because the pound has been so bad. And I think the pound has got big big problems, ranging from incompetent administration. We've just got nothing to back it with. You know, America's got its energy and its military. Yeah. We have neither of those.
We're closing down our energy.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I just think, and we've got a very incompetent administration that's spending way more than it takes in. Our biggest earners, a large portion of them are leaving where they can, so they're going to lose that tax revenue. You know, we've got, they don't understand the basic thing that lower taxes lead to increased revenue. That's sort of, but anyway. So
the Laffer curve, yeah.
All of that.
I've had left-leaning economists consistently denying the validity of the Laffer curve. I mean,
I don't think it's just because Laffer's name is on it and he's a right-wing economist from the 70s and 80s. The law existed long before his name was on it,
yeah.
And he freely admits himself he took the idea from Islamic philosophers in between the 6th and 10th century, and they took the idea from predecessors in wherever.
Yeah.
Well, ancient Greece. It's just
common sense.
It's
common sense,
yeah.
But economists don't do common sense, do
they?
No, unfortunately.
But yeah, so are we kind of agreed? Just in terms of my outlook for gold, I'd love to get yours, but it's just that I think we're in a bull market, and while central banks go on accumulating, I think there's no reason why gold can't carry on going up. We've talked about China and India and Brazil and South Africa not being ready to attack the dollar just yet, but there's all meetings going on behind the scenes at BRICS meetings going on behind the scenes at the summit. They're all probably saying, just not yet, keep on buying the gold, you're going to need it, but just keep accumulating. That's how I see it.
I see it similarly, but I think I do have some differences of opinion with you. I mean, when it comes to inflation, I view inflation as a fall in the purchasing power of the currency. Mm-hmm. What I see in dollar terms is money getting out of the dollar and getting into whatever else, and that whatever else is gold. And that tells us who's buying it, so I'll come to that in a moment. But the point is that if the purchasing power of the dollar is going down at a faster rate, then the inflation, if you like, of goods, even though the government statistics will never tell the truth about this, inflation rises. And from the foreigner's point of view, remembering that foreigners at the moment have something like 32 trillion invested in US dollars and underlying assets, financial assets. I'm not talking about physical property and things like that. They've got to have a reason to hold on to that, or even a reason to add to it in order to stabilize the currency against other currencies. They're looking at this and they're thinking, hold on, there's a debt trap here. The debts are increasing. We have got an election coming up, and the budget deficit until September 25 is likely to be, well, let's chuck a figure in the air, 2.5 to 3 trillion, something like that, with these spendthrifts. Could be even more, because if Trump gets in, he's talking about cutting taxes to spur growth. He's got the truss approach, as it were. And he's going to make up any differences or deficiencies by raising tariffs. Tariffs tell me two things. First of all, it's going to add to that perceived rate of inflation because the consumer will end up paying the tariffs. And the second point about it is that we have forgotten the effects of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930, which plunged the whole world into an absolute crisis, particularly in a global farming crisis, which admittedly was aided by the invention of the tractor some 20 years earlier. So, the problems that we had in America, there's no doubt at all that they were made considerably worse by Hoover's. Well, it was actually put in by Herbert Hoover. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, if Trump tries to do the same thing, and I have no doubt that he will try and do it, then the results of that could be disastrous. So, looking at it as a foreigner, let's say the People's Bank of China or whatever, Do I want dollars? Do I? Hell is like. I'm going to get out of these dollars as quickly as I can. So what do I sell? What do I buy? I sell dollars for euros? No. Yeah, no. My own currency? The problem is that the dollar goes, the whole caboodle goes. So my only protection is to buy gold. And the interesting thing is that if you talk to analysts in the London gold markets, they can see perhaps half to 60% of the demand for gold. The rest of it is hidden. They just don't see it. So as far as they're concerned, there's a whole lump of gold being mined and coming in as scrap, which they can't identify where it's going. And this tells me that it's going outside reporting, which basically, so if you look at customs, that customs cover non-monetary gold. So this is gold effectively going into central banks, wealth funds, anything that is, if you like, government and quasi-monetary. Now, you see the amounts going through. I mean, they're absolutely huge. And it so happens that the amount of gold which appears to be missing marries in quite well with Russia's output, China's output, the CIS states' output, and various others in that camp, the BRICS Shanghai Cooperation Organization camp. It seems to me the word is out amongst these guys at the highest level that the dollar is going down, perhaps partly as a result of what we're doing, but for God's sake, get out of dollars. And they're doing that by going into gold. And I think that's why we're seeing something which none of us can really put a handle on. And the retail interest is virtually zero. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really is zero. When you look at the ETF numbers, the only ETF which actually saw some reasonable subscriptions was the big SPDR one.
Still lower than it was in 2020.
Oh, well done. Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that that's some of the more prescient institutions will go and buy that ETF because their compliance officer looks askance at buying a non-regulated investment, which of course is physical gold.
Yeah.
So that's the route that they would go. So I think some of the money, if you like, in the establishment, in the sort of investment management establishment, particularly at the highest level, is beginning to grab this story. But it's so early days. But the real demand is coming from central banks and governments who are not fools. They can see what's happening to the dollar, and they can see it's in a debt trap, and they can see that interest rates will have to rise in order for the US Treasury to fund itself. And it's so similar to the situation we had in this country in late 75, 76, when sterling collapsed. The Americans came in and bought sterling to support it. They sent the IMF in to put some discipline on our government. And Healy then balanced the budget and things recovered. But I remember as a broker, 3 gilt tranches. There was a 15%, 15.25%, 15.5%. What would that do to US government finances today with 135% debt to GDP? I mean, at that time, our debt to GDP was something like 60 or 70%. It wasn't anything like this level, and we were in crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anywhere can support interest rates even half that level.
No, and so that raises an interesting point about equities, because the equity valuation has gone so far adrift from where it should be relative to the yield on bonds already. So if you get high yields on bonds, then that's going to absolutely kill the equity market.
Yeah, well, I think Trump is a low rates guy.
I know, yeah, but he's not going to have the option because the foreigners will just sell the backside off the dollar. Maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of roads, and a lot of them lead to gold.
Exactly, that's where we always end up.
Yeah.
We may not understand why, but my goodness, that's the place to go.
It is the money of last resort.
And now, the money of first resort.